Welcome everyone. This is Jess from Fourth and Birch. This is my Rainbow Swirl tumbler. Alright, so first I have my stainless steel 20-ounce tapered. I prepped it, sanded it, and coated it with a black matte spray paint. And I let that dry thoroughly before I go to the next step. Alright, let's talk about our alcohol inks. I am using both Tim Holtz Ranger brand as well as Pinata brand. You can use whatever colors you want, more pastel, more primary colors, but for mine, for my red, I'm using Chili Pepper from Pinata. For my orange, Valencia from Tim Holtz Ranger. Yellow doesn't look beautiful in the bottle, but it's beautiful on the tumbler. It's Sunshine Yellow. Green is Rainforest Green from Pinata. Blue is a beautiful sapphire blue. It's a wonderful color on the tumbler. I love it. And same thing with this purple. It's called Passion Purple from Pinata. So after we put all of our rainbow colors on, then we are going to put some drops of white. And I use Pinata Blanco Blanco. I would greatly recommend that you do not use any other brands. We definitely will like the Pinata for this part. All right, let's talk epoxy. We're not ready yet to put on those beautiful alcohol inks. We need an epoxy layer first. So I am using Swift Epoxy by Tumbler Epoxy brand. There is an A and a B. We're going to use equal volumes of both. It's not by weight, it's by volume. So I have a little medicine cup that I'm going to use. I'm filling them up here. And now I have 12 cc's of A, or I'm sorry, 12 and a half cc's of A, 12 and a half cc's of B for a total of 25 cc's. I'm going to mix this up thoroughly. Swift Epoxy likes a nice, long 5 minutes, somewhat aggressive stir, but you want to try not to add air bubbles to that if you can. So I'm going to mix that up here and I'll be right back. All right, I'm back, mixed up. It's been a 5-minute stir. And as you can see, it's nice and clear. Just a few micro bubbles that I incorporated during stirring, but those will come out, especially when you're putting this onto your tumbler. You just want to try to avoid as many as you can. So I get my cup spinning. You see actually there's a little dent in it. This is a cup that somebody gave me to use to make for them. But that's why we chose this type of tumbler with the swirling and whatnot, because you're not going to see that imperfection, that dent whatsoever. You're not even going to see the name of the tumbler, the brand. So I'm starting with gloves and putting the epoxy, smearing it. I personally, everybody has their own preference of how they like to do this. I like to start with my rim. I like to make absolutely sure, as you see me here, I'm making absolutely sure that the epoxy goes over my rim. So it's actually a bit messy. I want kind of a glob, a ring of epoxy on the inside of that, of the tumbler, of the rim, and I'll deal with that later. But I want to make 100% sure that my epoxy layer goes at least all the way up to the rim, preferably over it, and then I will just take my Dremel at the end and deal with the overage. But you definitely don't want to come up short with your epoxy. This is what's helping seal everything. So as people later on in the lifetime of the tumbler, as they're washing it and whatnot, if you have any imperfections or areas that are not completely sealed with the epoxy, that's how water gets underneath, and that's going to ruin your tumbler. So now that I make sure that my rim is good and covered, I just slowly start bringing the epoxy down. You do want to push your finger down a bit. You want the whole tumbler covered, but as you're rubbing your finger and putting the epoxy on like this, you're helping pop bubbles. So we don't just want to pour it on and let it be. It's nice to rub it. Also, this one's a little easy to see because of the black, but it's not always easy to see if every little minute piece, nook and cranny is covered with epoxy, but you want it to be. So as you're smearing your finger on, you will be able to feel dry spots. And if you feel one of those, throw some epoxy on it. I'm making sure it's getting in that little ridge at the bottom. And then in a little bit here, I'm going to throw some on the bottom of my tumbler. making sure you get every square inch of that thing. And then it's not really what we call a flood coat of epoxy. A flood coat is usually something you'd put over maybe a chunky glitter layer. But this is a little thicker of a layer than what I would use to, say, just my last layer of epoxy, or to just quick coat something, because we do want some movement. Once we start putting these alcohol inks onto this, we want the epoxy to move around a bit and start swirling. That gives us our beautiful swirls at the end. So you need a decent amount of epoxy. Again, I'm using 25 is what I mixed up, and I did not use the whole thing. I maybe used like 20 or so, 20 cc's. So all right, we're gonna let this spin just a little bit. You could use a quick heat gun or torch, just a bit to get the bubbles out. But now we're gonna put on our alcohol inks. All right, this is where the magic starts to happen. But first, what we need to do is pause for a moment. We need to think about where we want to put our alcohol inks. So I want, in rainbow order, red to purple, and I want red at the top, purple at the bottom. So I am going to apply these in basically equal-ish width strips. So when I put the purple on first, you're going to see that I just do it at the bottom, and I'm in my mind just estimating that I'll have enough width for each of the rest of the 5 colors, so for the 6 total. So just something to keep in mind. It's okay if they blend a little bit, but we want to keep them somewhat separate, because that's what gives us that beautiful rainbow swirl at the end. Alright, so if you watch very closly when I put on my purple, you will be able to see a little bit of almost like dark discoloration. First I put purple on the bottom, by the way, bottom of the tumbler, you want a little bit of that. But so as I put the purple, so it's spinning, I want the purple strip to go all the way around my tumbler. But as you can see, it's kind of shinier, darker black. That is my purple strip. And it's kind of starting to inch up my cup, because that's just what epoxy does. It's just the alcohol inks move through. So here's my blue, just doing a strip of that. Again, making sure I keep dripping it so the color goes all the way around my tumbler. Next, I'm throwing in my green. This one is my 3rd color, so I only want this to go about halfway up the tumbler. I got a little far there, which you'll end up seeing at the end. It kind of overtakes my yellow a bit. I'm adding a few more drops of green because that color didn't go all the way around the tumbler. You want to, like a belt, go all the way around. So I'm starting my yellow here. Again, it's okay if I put some yellow on top of the green, because a little bit of blending is okay, but again, we want to keep the colors somewhat separate in their own little channels and their own little lines. Here's my Valencia orange. So we'll make a row of that. You'll see how these spread out when you're doing this in front of you. It's hard to see on this video, but you'll be able to see kind of where you're missing drops and where you think you want more. So I'm going to go all the way up to the top with my red. Make sure that the epoxy, that there's not really any of the epoxy that doesn't have some color. So I come back with, I think this is my green. Yep, there must have been a spot or two that I could see that the green didn't make it all the way around. And yeah, that is putting the alcohol ink. So you can barely see them, but don't you worry. In just a little bit here, the magic is going to happen. All right, here's the exciting part. This is adding the Pinata Blanco Blanco. Again, this is the only brand and color that I use for this step. So we're going to start putting drops on. Make sure you mix this very well. Shake it up before you start applying it. And I went like in a little diagonal line there, but it does not matter. Make sure you get a drop or two on the very bottom of your tumbler. But basically, we are just going to put drops kind of equally spread out. Wherever you put this is where your colors are going to come out, as you can see. So if you want a tumbler that's mostly colors and not much black background, you want more of this white. If you want most of a black cup and just a little bit of color, put less of it. So I don't want my colors just to swirl around the cup in a kind of horizontal fashion. So I use my tumbler, the one that I can pick up. I don't use one of my stationary ones that's attached to a couple other tumblers, like my 4-turner. I use this single one so I can pick this up because I want my colors to start to swirl kind of into each other, not just back and forth, left and right. I want them to move up and down and start looking more like a swirl, basically. Otherwise, you're just going to get kind of a little more lines, more so when your cup is sitting up normally and you're holding it with your coffee in it. I don't want horizontal lines necessarily. I mean, you could if that's what you want, that's perfectly fine, but I want them to start moving into the other colors. Now you see I lost my yellow a bit. It's okay, but I added some more alcohol ink. And now I'm adding some more yellow I'm sorry, I added the yellow. Now I'm adding more Blanco Blanco in hopes that I'm going to pull out a little more yellow coloration here since my blue and my green kind of took over. And what you can also do is, so when you have drops of the white like this, what you can do is come back with the alcohol ink colors and put a drop of color right on top of that white. So let's see what color I choose to do that with first. Here we go. Well, here's some yellow. I'm adding a little more yellow again in hopes of there. So I had a white drop there and I put yellow alcohol ink on top of it. I'm gonna do that with the blue here. I had a white drop there and I'm adding more blue on top of it. What that does is it pushes the white out to the outsides of that drop. So you get deep color on the inside of the little color splotch, and the white almost outlines it. So it's not really pastel colors. This is helping your rainbow colors pop by putting a few drops inside. So basically you have your alcohol inks on first, then you put your white drops, and then you put more alcohol ink color drops on top of wherever you have a white drop. Does not have to be every white drop, but just a few. If you see there's kind of a big white area that's turning the colors kind of pastel, plop a drop of color on it. So here I'm adding a bit of heat with my heat gun. You want to be very careful with heat. If you see a couple air bubbles, great, get rid of them. But for the most part, the heat is to just add a bit of warmth. It makes your epoxy a little more fluid, so it thins the viscosity of it, so it flows more. So that's great, except if you make it very thin or very warm and it starts flowing a lot, you'll see here in a minute what's coming around. I almost have these lines, these runaway lines right there, kind of a red and a green one together, that are starting to kind of race around my cup, and I don't really want that. I want these nice like paint splotches of color. I don't want like that right there. I don't want those lines to continue, especially not in every color. If you want that look, absolutely warm it up a bit more and keep your tumbler horizontal like this while you're doing it. But I'm going to keep holding it up like this, kind of standing it up, being very careful not to touch my tumbler to anything, to my finger, to the table, anything like that, just to help movement kind of up and down between colors a bit. And I'm sorry, I'm a little out of camera here, but I'm just letting it spin while holding it kind of. My red here, I wanted it to warm up just a titch, kind of right there where I put a few last drops. So I use my heat gun just to warm up a little more on the top. Again, use that sparingly. You can always add a little more heat, but you can't take it away. So if your colors start running away and blending too much, that's the best you can do. All right, I'm going to let these colors kind of move together. This is another reason I like using Swift Epoxy for this. I don't want my epoxy fluid and blending and swirling for the next few hours. I want this to start curing quickly. It means I have to move quickly. I have to get my colors on and my white on, in about 10 minutes or so I still have movement. But I don't want my colors to continue blending over the next few hours while the epoxy cures. All right, 20 minutes later, so my epoxy is definitely still wet, but it's curing now, so it's quite thick. There is not going to be any more color movement of this, so I'm loving it. I'm loving the swirls. Again, I like how all the colors stayed pretty separate, thanks to my fast curing time of my epoxy. I'm going to blend in a bit here, or zoom in, excuse me. I want you to see I have a couple fish eyes. Right there is one. It's just something. I've been doing these tumblers for a long time, and I have yet to do an alcohol swirl tumbler that doesn't have like at least one or two. Right there, you can see how the epoxy, the light kind of shines off of it. It's almost like a little divot. We will fix that in the next round. Do not worry about those. They will not be noticeable in the least at the end. Just know where they are. This is the bottom. I like this as well. So again, I put purple on the bottom, and I made sure to put a drop or two of white, and that swirls nicely on its own. All right, so this is cured. Take this off of our turner, and wow, I just love these swirl tumblers. You can make them any colors that you want to. You can make them less swirl, less blend, more blend, whatever you want. And boy, they just always turn out so beautiful. I'm in love with these, and they're pretty easy and kind of hard to screw up. Once you know what you like and where you want the colors, you get going, and it's great. So again, the bottom, I made sure there was some purple ink on it at the beginning. I threw a drop or two of white as it was spinning, and it made a beautiful bottom. So let's talk a little bit about those fish eyes that I was talking about before. I have one in my teal right there. You can see the light kind of shining off of it, that little divot. I'm going to sand that with some fine sandpaper around it just to scuff it up a bit. I have another one right there in my green. Again, I don't know that I've ever made one of these tumblers that I didn't have a fisheye or two, at least one or two, on my first layer. But we are always going to put another layer of epoxy on top of this. So again, do not worry, just sand a little bit around those. And we'll sand any bubbles. If you can feel any bubbles or anything, we'll sand that too, just a light sand. We'll move on to the next step, which is going to be when I don't have a house full of children, so I actually can have my real-time volume up and commentary with you. So we're going to do the next layer of epoxy with a beautiful shimmer from a Marabou alcohol ink. Hi, welcome back. Thanks for joining us. This is Jess from 4th and Birch. Here is my rainbow swirl cup. You will see I picked it up when it was slightly tacky, not much at all, but there's tiny little fingerprints in this. But then I also did sand down. These were my biggest two fish eyes here. You can see those as they go around. And a couple other places that had like maybe just minor little like fish eyes or, I don't know, bumps or something like that. So I did that. Here's my fish eyes again. We are going to add our last layer of epoxy to this. For this, I used my Swift epoxy for the main part. I don't always have the greatest luck with Swift epoxy for my final layer, and maybe it's how I mix it, but sometimes it comes up a little tacky. So if I just go to the regular Tumbler epoxy, same company, just their regular takes longer to cure, I get like a perfect finish every time. So I'm going to go to that for my last layer. So I hopefully don't have like I said, ever so slightly tacky. This one isn't even that bad, but just not what I want for my final layer. So we're going to do that. I'm also going to add in just a tiny bit of this Marabou alcohol ink. This is the rainbow color. So basically it's alcohol ink. I have not shaken it up yet, so I don't know if you can see, there's the label here. At the bottom, it's kind of like settled. So it's got like this little, I keep moving it further away, sorry. You can kind of see it's kind of, oh my gosh, focus. Yeah, now it's kind of starting to mix up a little bit. There, you can see right there, just a little bit. So this is something that you have to mix up very well. Or shake it up, I'm sorry, shake it up before we use it. So I'll put that into my epoxy once I'm done getting that all mixed up. So I'm gonna go to my Tumbler epoxy, use equal amounts of A and B, and I will be back as soon as I have that mixed up. Stay tuned. All right, welcome back. I have my epoxy mixed up. Not too many bubbles, although when we spread it on here, a lot of them will go away. And then we'll do a quick hit of heat at the end. So I have this mixed up. I'm going to add a little bit of that. Where did I put it? Here it is. Of this rainbow alcohol ink. Oh my goodness, would you focus? There we go. All right. I have 20 cc's total of epoxy. Let's see what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I don't know. We'll try 8, maybe. Nope, there's a little clog in there. We're gonna go 7 to start. That actually might be plenty. I only want just a little, kind of a little sheen. We'll see once it mixes here. I actually think that's pretty good. It's kind of hard to see, right? There is kind of a sparkle to that, right? A nice little sparkle. So I like to get my rim first to make sure that I have it all the way around with no dry spots along the rim. Might be a little thick right now, that's okay. And then I actually take my finger and I drag it along like this because I want to make like a nice bubble, not air filled, but a nice glob, I guess would be the word, of epoxy, because I want it to go inside of the cup. I will clean that up later with my Dremel, but I want to make sure that it goes all the way over the rim and onto the inside. So when I do come to clean this up, I'm 100% sure it's covering my entire top of my rim and it's seamless all the way down. So I'm looking on the inside of my cup here and I can see that I have a nice, let's see if I can even show you quick, a nice glob on the inside, if everybody can see that. All right, we'll keep that spinning. Sorry, that was just a quick look. All right, so now I'll come here. I'll make sure that I still have a good amount of epoxy up to my rim. Kind of start pulling down then. I think this was the perfect amount of this rainbow alcohol ink to put in here. It's just ever so subtle. Unless the light hits it, then it really shines, and that's exactly what I want. So with a lot of this epoxy, especially for your last layer, you want kind of a nice long finger, and you want to drag. You don't want to pop your cup off, but you want to drag, not so that I have like a little something I need to take care of here. Looks like a little something. Oh, look like a little dog here, but it's just a swirl. Anyway, you want to kind of push down on your cup when you are applying the epoxy, because that's helping pop bubbles. So you don't want a super thin layer, but when you're putting it on, you don't just want to glob it and let it be. Yes, it will self-level when you have it spinning like this. That is kind of the point. But if you make a lot of contact with a curved finger, all the way down, you are gonna pop a lot of bubbles that just happen to be hanging out. I do the same thing. I still have work to do up here, but I'm coming down to my bottom to make absolutely sure that my epoxy goes all the way around. I don't have a ton of epoxy left, so before I even work on maybe fixing some issues up here, I'm going to make absolutely sure to get my bottom, because sometimes you end up dripping too much off the bottom and kind of wasting some, but you don't want to save the bottom to last, because if you're like, oh, I only need like 3 cc's or 3 mils to do the bottom, and then you accidentally drop an entire glop on your table, well, you probably needed more, didn't you? So, all right. So my bottom is nicely covered. My butt here is nicely covered. And now I'm just going to kind of go through, make sure I don't have any super huge globby areas, or when I drag my finger along that I don't have any dry areas that I've completely missed. I'm not pulling a ton of epoxy when I do this. I'm more trying, almost like spreading frosting on a cake. You're going to end up pulling a little bit, but you're not moving all the epoxy. You don't want to take it away from one place. I thought maybe I saw another inclusion or something here. Meaning something that doesn't want to be there, like a dog hair or a lint or something, but maybe it was just a little bubble. All right, that's really about it. So I had 20 in here total. I have a little less than 5 left. I could put it on here, but I don't need a super huge layer for the last layer. I have enough on my rim, so that's gonna give me a nice seal. I have enough on my bottom, and I'm liking this. So I'm gonna grab my torch. And we're going to use my torch here. And you don't need a ton of heat with Tumbler epoxy. That's good. The hotter you get it, the more liquid-like it gets. And you don't want that spinning around your cup super fast, because that's how you make it more fish eyes. Just seeing a couple bubbles here as they come around. Actually see like a little fish eye there that I might need to fix. Let's wait for when it comes around. It's right here. Alright. Sometimes those can be caused by the epoxy being repelled by something. So there could have been like a fingerprint there, like a little oil from your fingers, or it could have been like a little alcohol, like rubbing alcohol. Uh-oh. Dog here, cool. Get that out of there. Hitching a ride. And I have a little piece of glitter. Of course, a piece of glitter that I used like weeks ago. All right, we're gonna look for a few more bubbles here. I'm kind of watching as it comes around in the light. And watch back for this area that I had my issue earlier. And I don't see that spot anymore, so that's good. We're looking pretty good there. Okay, so this is regular Tumbler epoxy, so we are gonna let this sit for overnight. Actually, it's about 3 p.m. right now here, so I'm just gonna put my my Tupperware thing kind of over this so it hopefully repels the rest of the dog hair in this darn place. And then we'll let this sit and we'll be back to just show you what it looks like tomorrow. Thanks for coming back and joining us. I have my cup that's been sitting underneath this guy. I just put this on to help keep the lint and the dog hair and the dust and everything off. So put it this way. It's been overnight, so I know for sure that this is cured, but I always keep my cup that I used next to, well, I use a little medicine cup that I used next to my cup. I just stick it down here somewhere. And instead of saying, touch, 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 hey, is my tumbler dry yet or cured yet? And risking maybe it's not and getting some fingerprints in it, if you touch your cup that had the epoxy in it, then you know that it is dry. Let me zoom in a little bit here for everybody. So anyway, so you touch this and it's dry, it's not sticky, so you know that your cup is the same, not sticky. So, okay, let's move some of this here. So first we'll talk about the inside here of this rim. And this is actually what I want my epoxy to do. That's when I was dragging my finger along with my epoxy to get this pretty thick layer. And some dog hair, cool, cool. Always trying to get by. So what I actually like, and I like it when it connects all the way around. So if you see here, it didn't fully connect, not the end of the world. But the reason that I like it when it does, so I know that it's thick and it goes all the way around this entire part. And then I'm going to end up taking my Dremel. I don't have that in front of me right now because I usually save a bunch of cups to do when they need the Dremel. But so I grab the Dremel and let's see if I can kind of show you the angle though that I do. So if this is the top of the cup, I usually angle my Dremel like this, and then I go all the way around the edge. So this, and then I tip it in, just straight in. So what that does is it gets my, it cuts through or sands through the epoxy on this inner edge right about here. So that means this entire metal top, that really thin line that's pointing up, that's flat towards the ceiling, that will still have some epoxy on it, or at the very least all the way up to it. So I take that Dremel and I go at an angle like this, so not flat, in a little bit, and I do that. So you don't want the epoxy to be in to the cup when it's finished, because every time you put the cover on and off, you're gonna tick that epoxy, and that's going to put strain on it, and eventually it's going to pull up, and you'll get air behind it, and then your tumbler is completely done for. So anyway, I do that. So I go all the way around with the Dremel, so it goes all the way down to the metal, and then you have this entire loop that all you do is you just pick it and it comes out like in one piece. Super clean. You don't have all these little drips and chunks to try to scrape off with your little oh my gosh, I have no words today, the little Cricut razor knife cutting this bad boy. You can use this for taking all of this off, and it does work. The thickness of epoxy that I put on here though, it is a little hard to get through, and a lot of people just pull when they do this, and what you're doing is you're risking the epoxy pulling up on your final project. So if you end up using this, make sure you tip it in as well, but you almost have to use a very subtle sawing motion, because you want to get through the epoxy. You want to kind of saw through it, but you don't want to pull it and pull it and pull it and risk pulling this away from the cup, if that makes sense. because if it does, you might not even see it. It might be small enough, but when it gets washed a few times, water's going to seep into that. So I don't love using this. I use it at the end when if I need to like pick out something on the inside that's, you know, like a little straggler of epoxy. But I don't typically use this tool for cleaning up my rims. I use the Dremel, and then maybe that to pick this to start it. Once this inner unwanted part is separated completely from the rest of my epoxy on my cup, that's when I pick it up and just pull it out, and you're done. That's it. So it makes a tiny bit more work. You use a little more epoxy, but so worth it in the end. So, all right, let's get to the cup itself. And I'm looking here. I had some fisheyes up here when I was putting my epoxy on that I tried to fix, and I don't feel them at all. So I'm super happy with that. If I did have some, I'd have to sand them and put another layer of epoxy on. I'm not feeling any air bubbles, any little bumps. And if you can see that little bit of shimmer, it is so sparkly, but subtly sparkly. You know, you can't necessarily see it from across the room, but you walk up to it or the light hits it, and it's beautiful. The nice thing about adding a tiny bit of this kind of stuff too is if you aren't great with popping bubbles, or if your epoxy has a tendency to hang on to bubbles, these almost hide them. You know, you won't hide them by feel. You know, if you have a bubble that's mostly to the surface, you will feel it. But other than that, if you have a couple that are buried in there, you can't see them as well when you have a little bit of glitter or a little bit of sparkle with it, because it kind of pulls your eye away from that, and it kind of blends in. So yeah, this is my latest rainbow swirl cup. I love doing these. They sell really well, and they're just beautiful, and you can do any colors. So, you know, some people want their favorite football or baseball teams or whatnot. And if you don't put the glitter in, technically it could be a guy's cup too. Tumblers are tough to do sometimes for men. You know, I mean, I have so much glitter here and I love using it, and then you get a man that wants a cup, or somebody that wants a cup without glitter, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm at a complete brain stall. I have no idea what I'm gonna do. So anyway, this is it. If you have any questions, pop them in the comments, and I'll be more than happy to answer them. So thanks for joining me. I appreciate you being here. We'll see you next time.